I don't have a format, so we're kind of winging this as far as certain issues. I was asked to make a disclaimer to let you know this is not a CA meeting. It is a workshop. What you're hearing is everybody's memories and opinions. And we've all turned into old men in the last 20-plus years. Oh, and a young woman. So, you know, bear with us. My name is Ken Cross. I'm an alcoholic and an addict. My sobriety date is February 3rd, 1983. My home group, or my first meeting of Cocaine Anonymous, my first 12-step meeting ever was Group 1, LACA. And this was before there was a service structure, before there was anything. There was like, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 meetings, I think, total at the time. And I'm going to basically facilitate this and pass this back and forth and introduce the people who have showed up. This always happens to be because, yeah, I'm a very, I get very emotional about Cocaine Anonymous and the history of Cocaine Anonymous and what it's done for me and what it's done for a lot of people that I know, not only just in L.A. and the United States, but now all over the world, you know. And so we're going to go down this table, and everybody's going to share for 10 to 15 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to questions and answers. And the first person I'm going to introduce is my friend Marshall R. Marshall was one of the early members of AA who had a few months when, I can do this, Richard, believe it or not, and who, when the thought came to mind about having a meeting for cocaine addicts, Marshall was involved in that first meeting, which then turned into CA. So I'm going to introduce Marshall.
Good. My name's Marshall. I'm an alcoholic and a cocaine addict. It's always significant to me to qualify as a cocaine addict, and being here brings me back quite a while. My sobriety date is August 28th, 1982. In November of 1982, I was given a little yellow card by Tony M. that said AA meeting for cocaine, Tuesday night, a motion picture health and welfare group on La Brea over here in Hollywood. And at the time, it was very challenging and not very comfortable to talk about drugs in an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. And my story was that when I was taken to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting by a friend of mine, we did aerobics together, and he said I went to an AA meeting, and well, we did aerobics and then we went out and got loaded, but. He said, I went to an AA meeting, a friend of mine, and your name came up and you should go, and I went. And the issue for me was it wasn't clear that I was an alcoholic. But one of the things that I really actually knew was that I had tried to give up doing cocaine and I couldn't. And I actually thought that was a problem. And when this meeting happened, I ran to it, and the story that, to the best of my knowledge, and I still someone, a man by the name, I'm going to break his anonymity, he deserves a medal, I think, by the name of Tom Kinney, ran the Motion Picture Health and Welfare Fund section, and he was getting phone calls from studios and didn't know what to do with the guys that had cocaine problems, so he called some AA guys that he knew that had cocaine problems, and we got together, and I don't know, there was either 19 or 29 of us, I don't remember exactly, but there was this big furor. Was this going to be an AA meeting, or were we going to start a new program? You know, I was laughing. I called my girlfriend on the way over because it was very profound. I had a very profound moment, actually, of realizing that I'd actually insignificantly, but by getting sober, became a part of history, and I was sort of like talking about that. I occasionally have those moments, but Tom, I think, also had a meeting in Studio 12 that had some cocaine in it. There was a hospital that in Boston or Detroit that maybe even said Cocaine Anonymous somewhere. But what happened was it Texas? Yeah. But what happened was that the AA, those of us in AA were, I called her up and I said, I'm going to share that I'm really, thank God for grandiosity, big shotism, power and control, and with cocaine addicts, it's like, hello. But, that, who is going to be secretary? We said, well, let's start a new meeting on Thursday, or let's start a meeting. This was an AA meeting. Everybody thought it'd be an AA meeting, so we'll keep it an AA meeting, but you can do whatever you want. Eventually that became a whatever meeting, and it became a huge 200, became one of the largest meetings at the time for in Hollywood, and I think probably transitioned, was a core. It was a spiritual meeting that you could go being a drug addict and an alcoholic from the rock and roll era. I mean, because it was angry, and it was raucous, and it was young, and it was like, or young as far as I was concerned. You did not hear, I spilled more on my tie than you drank kind of shit, I mean, listen, I am grateful. My sponsor had, 58 years when he died, and I'm grateful that he stayed sober. But, if it weren't for Veronica G. volunteered to be the secretary of that Thursday night meeting, and no one really thought about what was going on. I mean, I was grateful for those people who wanted to get involved in the administrative aspects because I was too flipped out. I was so grateful to go to a meeting where I could talk about cocaine because I could not run away from that drug. I could not run away from my powerlessness over that. It was the very anchor of my sobriety, and I have had continuous sobriety to this day, which I'm very grateful for and very blessed for. I mean, it's just, I don't really know what happened, but, someone said, who will answer the phones? Or I'm a writer, so I wrote with someone else. We came over and we wrote a pamphlet on the first 30 days and to the newcomer, and all of it was like holding on to the 12 steps of AA because we were terrified of coming up with some other scheme because of what some of us had heard about the history in AA, about Bill wanting to make hospitals and then saying, no, all of this stuff, like I got loaded with Johnny S. when we were on location in Houston years before both of us got sober. And I owe a debt of gratitude to him as we all do. But, I ran into him when I was early sober, and he said, the great thing about, before Cocaine Anonymous, he said, the great thing about AA is that no one runs it and no one makes any money off of it. And, the fact is that that's a thing in CA that I think was very important. I mean, the question is that, and I shared about it in an old-timers meeting that I go to where there was some pomposity about old-timers. We didn't have anybody except each other. So it was classic to have one addict helping an addict, period. What did I have, 90 days, maybe 6 months when Ken came in. And you know what, when you went to an AA meeting and you ran into people who were going to a CA meeting, there was a special bond. It just was what it was. For me, that's the spiritual connection that I carry with me through to this day. Now, I did not get involved, as some other members of the panel have, I was a worker bee. I answered the phones from my home when we would either, Richard and I were trying to remember, did we call in and pick the messages up off the machine? Were they call forwarded? But, and a lot of them I remember at the time were from moms, parents. What do I do about my kid? And even then, it's not too much different. I was with a newcomer fairly recently who was homeless, didn't have a place to go, didn't have any money, and go find a place to put him that night. It's so, the fact is that my experience of Cocaine Anonymous is that it reflects the indigenous nature of the drug in every aspect of it, in the personalities, in the personality of the organization, and in what cocaine did to me when I get high. I see it in the group. We were spinning like tops. There was Serenity was just sitting still, like going through a meeting. It's like, we were definitely graced by God, and everybody shivered when the word was spoken. Because it was, like when certainly with my behaviors as a guy who dealt cocaine, who was on the in the entertainment business, around sex, drugs, and rock and roll. That was what my scene was, period, and all aspects of it. And I at the time we called it freebase. I sort of was wise enough to know not to do that because it was too good and I would get too hooked, and I still couldn't avoid it, And what has happened in the course of the 20 years is that I got divorced a couple of years ago, and I was in the nucleus of a lot of men's groups, and I went. I needed to reach back out into the mainstream a little bit and not isolate. And I walked in, and there was Ken, and I see Richard at another meeting, and it's a powerful foundation, and it's overwhelming to me to see everyone come together and to see this save lives and realize that really all we were doing was trying to be selfishly save our own ass, or do whatever we needed to do to stay sober. That was whether that was to puff up our ego or to go to work or to do whatever it was. It was such, from my point of view, there was so much arbitrariness to the whole thing, except that clearly there was a need and certainly there was a grace for it. And I don't, that's about as much as I'm grateful that I was there because it helped me stay sober, and I'm grateful that I'm here now and still alive, and thank you, Ken, for asking me.
Next gentleman, loosely phrased, Richard is going to share, was also a participant at the first meeting and later involved in the first World Service Board. If you do have cell phones, see if you can turn them off. And this is Richard L.
Thanks. I'm Richard, and I'm an addict and an alcoholic.
Hi, Richard.
And my heart's kind of speeding right now. Not from doing cocaine, but because there's so much, that I'm going to try and cram in a matter of 10 minutes. Just to let you know, my sobriety date is May 21st, 1984. But it goes back to my first meeting, was back with Marshall in 1982. I didn't quite grasp it, be able to stay sober, but I stuck around the program. What happened to me was I was living with this girl who was a full-blown alcoholic, and I being the drug addict, she kept saying, your problem is you do drugs, and I told her, your problem is you do alcohol. And she was in the entertainment business, or close to it, and she had come in contact with a guy named Tom Kenny, who said, we're trying to start up this group, and it'll be perfect for the two of you to come there, especially since, your boyfriend here has a cocaine problem, which My problem was her. It wasn't the cocaine, I thought at the time. So we attended this meeting, and of course, being a good drug addict I was very paranoid about this meeting. And of course, the format always says try to relate to the feelings being shared, and of course, I listened to the differences, and there was a lot of people who were in the entertainment industry there, and they were talking about bouncing checks on their chauffeurs and, kilos of cocaine and, all these wild stories are grandiose. And I'm thinking, you know what, that's not me, but the truth was, they were all bullshitting just like I was, because I used to tell those stories too. I mean, here we are, 19 or 20 of us crammed inside this room, and it was really like a bunch of like juvenile delinquents. Because what was happening is we were reading a portion from I think it was the 12 and 12, where they used the part, trying to figure out, what to read, because there was no actual CA. It really was, as Marshall was saying, it was a Alcoholics Anonymous meeting for cocaine addicts. So what happened was changing the words to crushing the grapes to make wine to crushing the rocks and all this kind of stuff, and everybody was all laughing, and I would go to these meetings and I would kind of check them out, and then of course, we would get a phone call after the meeting saying, "Are you going to come back to the next meeting?" I was like, "Well, I don't know," and they would have the meetings, and there was a few guys there that would do that, and some of these people really embraced this program to get it going. And because they were literally going around hanging signs on telephone poles about these meetings that were going on to try to get it going. And I kind of floated in and out of the rooms, thinking, and what I did was I started, I figured, okay, well, I'll give up the cocaine, but I'll just drink, because that wasn't my problem. And of course, I finally, realized that. So then to kind of like a flash forward, when I started seriously coming back, getting involved, Cocaine Anonymous at this time was now, it started going. It started to branch out, and there was about 5 or 6 meetings. There was a couple in the Valley. I remember there was a Studio 12 meeting that was on Magnolia, and there was 11 Tolerance meeting. And out where I was, we had a meeting in Santa Monica, a St. John's meeting, and there was a couple of meetings at Cedars. Actually, it was a Thursday night meeting. There was a Tuesday whatever meeting. And they started to get a couple of ones, and then they branched out to Marina Del Rey on a Sunday, and so on. And I started to get more actively involved. And at that time, the phone lines, they were trying to do that because Cocaine Anonymous at that time was now got what they call a central office. And at that central office there, what they did is they were putting in a phone lines, finally getting them out of Johnny's house or whatever. They had everything. It was kind of call forwarding and that stuff on there. And they said they needed people to come answer the phones. And they were going to start doing that. So I had taken a commitment there. And I religiously for over, I would have to say at least 5 to 7 years, I had the Wednesday one in the afternoon. But it was like I would show up a lot there. And I remember at that time, I was telling Marshall this, that there was 2 shows that would come on at that time daily. One was the Phil Donahue show, and one was the Oprah Winfrey show. And every time the topic was, does your son or daughter have a problem with cocaine? And all of a sudden they would flash our number. Now the original, one number that the one in Texas had was called 1-800-COCAINE. And they would say, well, we're a hospital facility, but there is a 12-step program that is starting up. And the numbers in Los Angeles, and these phones would just ring, and you would hear, like Marshall said, it wasn't the addict and the addicts calling, it was the parents, it was the fans, and it was like, I can't get him to come out of the bathroom, I can't get him to come out, he's in there, and he's smoking away and whatever like that, can you help him? And they were like calling from like Indiana, and there's like no meetings going out there at the time. You see, it was trying to get, started outside of California, or at least, and all we knew in LA was really LA and a few other meetings. And at that time, they were also having at that office there, they were having this little World Service meeting. They were trying to start the World Services of Cocaine Anonymous. There was like 2 or 3 people in there, and they're saying, look, we got to kind of get ourselves united, because we're starting to grow. The disease, of course, is out there. We need to get the meetings and get the word out there that there is a program going. And Willie and Ray Grossa and a couple other people were out there, helping out. And they were having these meetings and trying to get it all together. And so Willie over here, they decided that a few people started to get involved, and they decided that they were going to try and maybe have a convention. And one of the first conventions was in Santa Barbara. And we figured that we'd try to get the word out and get as many people going. So the word went out, and I don't remember how many people showed up. It was like 700 or, whatever it was. It was a large amount of people that showed up. And we put on a convention. Now, the convention was put on by about 5 or 6 people. And we didn't know what to do, and everybody was taking different types of commitments and all kinds of stuff, and it was, the registration and that stuff. And Happy here is sitting with one of the original T-shirts, and the way that I know it's an original T-shirt is when we made the T-shirts, it sampled the people that were actively involved on helping to do I guess we could refer to it as the committee for this convention. We had a guy make the T-shirt, and we put the word Cocaine Anonymous on the back of the shirt. Now, Neil B. back there and myself were at a bank, and somebody taps me on the back saying, how can that be an anonymous program if it says Cocaine Anonymous on it? And this was about a month before the convention, and I come back to the board and say, look, we got to take that name off, and we changed this to CA. Before it went out, but Happy's got one of those original shirts, you'll notice it at the time. A lot of people got actively involved. Marshall was talking about writing and all that stuff. I was on they gave me the position of literature, and Neil was on it with me, and he did the chips. In the old days, CA had these square chips, and these chips were perfect because if you had a 30-day chip, it would wear off and wouldn't say anything on it after 30 days. And it'd be just in time to get your 60-day chip, and you'd be able to have a new one, and it would last you until 90 days. The problem was between 9 months and 6 months, you were, screwed. Nobody knew how much time you had because it'd wear off. And we decided, what happened was the board, they ended up making the round ones in different colors and that stuff. And we also didn't have a newcomer chip at the time. What had happened is I was at a meeting, I had a friend of mine who was talking and telling a story that he was with some girls in a jacuzzi, and they invited him and they asked him if he wanted to go get, smoke a joint and come up to their place. And he was thinking, yeah, I'll do that. And he grabbed his keys and noticed he had his chip on it. And he says, you know what, I'm going to have to pass. And it was like other 12-step programs had some form of a welcome chip. So we decided at the time that we're going to come out with a newcomer chip, so maybe somebody in the first 30 days might have a token that might help them remember that they're part of a 12-step program and maybe not get loaded. So getting back, there was a guy also named Bruce who had also worked on the first 4 pieces. From what I understand or remember is that the first piece to the newcomer came from Greg from Chicago. And then Marshall and Bruce and a few people worked on the other 4 pieces of literature. At that time, I know that there were other meetings in other areas that also had other literatures, and that's why one of the importance of having this first convention was to get some uniform and unity going on, and it almost turned into a little civil war at part of it, but eventually, it did get all worked out, and everybody became actively involved in it. I also want to thank Willie and put a plug for American Express in, because the very first convention was charged on Willie's American Express card. And there were stories that went with that, but literally it was all paid for him because none of us had credit except for Willie. And he was able to charge that, try to convince a hotel that you're going to have a group of cocaine addicts at your hotel, and we were put on a convention. They wanted a nice security deposit, and I don't know if that was a gold card or platinum card, but it definitely did help out. But from there are a lot of people who did get very active in CA. I also was active in the newsletter too, and it was called The Connection, and we used to write personal stories because we didn't have a big we didn't think we'd have a big book, and we still don't have a big book, but we knew we were going to have personal stories, and it got a chance for everybody to get out there. And there's a lot of people that were able to write stories, and everybody was able to pass the word through a lot of people. And the point I guess I'm trying to make is we would write an article called The 1%. And the article was even though a lot of people get actively involved in the fellowship, there's only about a 1% that really does the service. And there's been a lot of people that have been actively involved in this 1% of service, but have gone unknown by people. And a few of them have passed away sober, but, and been, really helped out. I mean, they helped at the logos, they helped at the conventions, the registrations, the leaflets, and stuff like that. And I think maybe next time we have a moment of silent meditation, we should have it for those people that are also there, because there is no one founder in this actual fellowship. A lot of people tried to take credit for it, but they really didn't. I mean, I have a friend named Harvey who loves to make a joke telling people that I'm number, 237 of the original 20 of Cocaine Anonymous, because there's so many people who want to take credit and say they're the founders and all that stuff, But, Tom was really the guy that kind of helped to get it going, stood back. But there's a lot of the 1% of people who really got involved, that helped spread out the word, that got it, who did, that did taping and did the literatures and the chips and tokens and all that kind of stuff. And even another plug for Neil. I mean, one of the things that he did is that, we're supposed to be charging, meetings for chips. And if they were starting up in a new city, didn't have any money, Neil was fronting them all that stuff, just like the old drug days, He was saying, just, when you got the money, send it to World Services, whatever it is, and that was it. And I'm so happy and I'm so grateful that I got to be a part of that, because, the service part has helped me stay sober that whole time, and working those phone lines and hospitals, institutions, anything has been, that really is very, very important to my sobriety, and it's helped carry a message to a lot of people. And thank you for letting me share.
Go ahead, Happy. I'm Ken Cross. I'm an alcoholic and an addict. And I'm just going to back up a little bit from where Richard kind of led up to. My first meeting of Cocaine Anonymous was January 14th, 1983, which was approximately 6 weeks after the meeting that Marshall and what's your name again? Oh, Richard mentioned. And, I walked in, and this woman, Veronica, who was going to try to be here today but couldn't make it because of her commitments with her family, was the secretary. And, I was just scared to death. They stuck me in a middle row surrounded by people, so I couldn't escape. And I was sitting there thinking, listening to the speaker, going, what am I doing here? And, and it wasn't the speaker that made a difference. It was the sharing and the participation in the meeting that made a difference, because I was living in a stolen car with stolen money, and I had no idea where my next meal was coming from. And the guy that, I had that car for a long time. And a man who relapsed shared. And he said that the reason he was back in a meeting was because he knew this was where the hope was, And I heard that. I didn't hear anything else that night, but I heard that, And as everyone so far has alluded to, this gentleman, Tom Kenny, I was introduced to him after the meeting, and he asked me if I had a big book, and I said no. And he gave me a big book, and he said, take this back, read more about alcoholism, and change the words alcohol to cocaine or cocainism, because that was Tom's favorite word, yeah, cocaines. Right. Cocaines and cocainism. And, and that's what we did, And the funny thing is, as Richard said, meetings just kind of sprouted up. There was like the first Valley meeting, then the second Valley meeting, and this was back before we had copy machines and we had mimeographs, and a couple of us would go in the original so-called what would be perceived as the central office was Tom's office, and we would go back in the back, and this woman, Krista, would type up the meeting directory, which was basically just a sheet of paper, one page, and we'd go to the mimeograph machine, and we'd stand there and crank the mimeograph machine out, and then we got to the point where you could actually fold the piece of paper and make it look like it was something, and and what happened from that place is, the great thing about Tom was, because he was so connected in the film business, he had the keys to every union hall in Hollywood, So I was complaining about a Friday night meeting, and he said to me, he says, oh, you don't like that? And he threw me a set of keys, and he went, go start a new Friday night meeting. Now, I had 45 days, But, what do we know? He said, go do it. Back then they would say, go get a commitment, and we didn't know those were suggestions, so we went and did it. So I started this Friday night meeting, and which is still in existence today. It blows my mind when I go over there still, And from that, there was a need for a Sunday night meeting, and I called Johnny and said, Johnny, I got keys. Do you want to be the Sunday night secretary? And he became the Sunday night secretary, and then Arthur became the Monday. You know, I mean, we just kind of passed these keys around in the coffee pot. And as it started to kind of take off a little bit, we weren't quite sure what to do. You know, we had this conversation with Tom about, like, what's the next step? And he said, well, why don't you guys get everybody together and have a conversation? And we made some phone calls to everyone that we knew that was at the time active in CA. There was a gentleman, Randy Kay from South Bay, Gil Moscow, Ray who's in the back. Ray and I are probably, I think we're the only two original CA-LA board members in the room. And I don't even know who's actually, I guess there's a few still around, and what happened is we called all these guys, we called the secretaries, we called Tony M., who Marshall had mentioned. Tom came, and this hospital, Beverly Glen Hospital, had a little room upstairs, and they told us we could use this room. And we all met up there one, I think it was a Saturday afternoon or something. And we talked about what should we do. And we called it the secretaries group. And this woman, Veronica, took notes, and you know, we went around the room and introduced ourselves, and it was one of those times where we were trying to figure out what to do, and so we decided the person with the most time would be the chairperson, and that was Gil. Gil had like a year and a half, so he became the chairperson. Johnny had 9 months, so he became the vice chairperson. And we literally just went down the line, depending on how much sobriety you had. You were assigned a position, you know, and you know, and it actually just kind of, like everyone said, it kind of just took off from there. You know, the Beverly Glen did give us a little office downstairs, and Ray used to answer the phones diligently at that office, and you know, and it really just, it sprouted and took a life of its own. And you know, I always too think it's funny, because being in LA and being still actively involved in CA, I've run into at least, I would say, 350 or 400 people who said they were at the first meeting, you know. And I've actually, as Howard can attest to, there's certain speakers who will get to the podium at conventions and claim to be founders of CA, and at the first meeting and writing of the steps and changing the stuff, you know. I mean, when we rewrote the format, the original format from an AA meeting to a CA meeting, I think there were 5 of us after the whatever meeting in Denny's at Sunset and Gardner, arguing over words, you know, arguing over the words to put in the format where, and all other mind-altering drugs came in. And, you know, and I shared this earlier today in another meeting, and when we did do the first World Service meeting, we were sitting at in the banquet hall, and they did a roll of the states, and the table next to me was from Alaska. You know, and Marshall said it best. We were a bunch of newcomers, self-obsessed, drug addicts, trying to stay sober. Somebody told us to get commitments, so we just started doing stuff because we had nothing else to do. You know? God was providing for us what we couldn't do for ourselves, and here's this group of Alaskan people hooting and hollering because they were at a CA convention in Santa Barbara, and a bunch of knuckleheads sitting in Denny's made this stupid little paper that got passed up to Alaska, you know? Now, if that's not God working in our lives, you know, I mean, that's what happened. It was the power of God supplying certain individuals just an opportunity to be of service, and things just took off, you know? And it was truly it's truly an amazing thing to have watched, you know? I'm not going to talk much longer because I want to give time to Willie and also Jackie, who's going to talk about CA today. But, you know, the opportunities that were there in the early days were just there because there was nothing else to do and nobody else to do it, you know. I remember I was given the money to go incorporate, and I told this when I was the speaker in 1990 at the Arizona World Service Convention. I was the one who was going to go incorporate CA for the first time with the state of California. And being the good drug addict, I took the $150 in cash that had been the dollar bill saved up from the like 4 or 5 meetings, and I stuck them in a bowl on my counter, and I said, well, I'll go do it tomorrow. And then a week turned into, well, I'll go get it next week. And, you know, then I finally woke up one day and said, you know, maybe I should go take care of that. And I went to go get the money, and the money was missing from my apartment. You know, some workmen had come in and found it or something. And I swear for years Johnny thought I had spent it on something, you know. And you know, I mean, I had like 4 months or something at the time, so it seemed likely. And, you know, and so it was like one of those things where, you know, I think Johnny ended up writing a personal check or loaning the fellowship the money to go ahead and do it at the time. And, you know, and I actually just gave up the final set of documents that I had that were signed for the Secretary of State that I just gave back to Central Office last year, you know, from those old archive stuff. And the thing that really moves me today about seeing so many of you, in early sobriety, I was given the book AA Comes of Age, and I learned to understand the roots of how that happened, you know. And over the years, CA, it's kind of fallen into this thing of we have no founders, you know, there's really nothing going on. And I agree with the fact that there really is no one or two founders, but we need to understand our roots and where we came from and what happened and how the work got done and how the work continues to get done, you know. And there's people in this room, Ray, Neil, who's over there on the nod, Bob Campbell. You know, there's people in this room that have been of continuous service to Cocaine Anonymous for upwards of 20, 21 years, you know, and it's such a miracle that these people are around. And it's like Richard was talking about, the 1%, you know. It's such a fantastic gift to be of service, you know, and to be involved in it. And anyway, I'm done. Thank you. Now, when I had about I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 months, I met the next gentleman, and we became friends. And when we first opened up our first real office that we paid rent on, we had no furniture. You know, it was like, well, we got an office. Now what do we do? And I was talking to Willie and said, well, I can get you some furniture. And we literally went over to Willie's offices with pickup trucks and got all these old beat-up metal school desks and chairs and stuff, and furnished Central Office, you know. And through Willie's friendship with me and then me introducing Willie to Johnny, Willie got actively involved in CA and was the chairperson of the First World Service Board when it was created. So I'd like to introduce Willie.
Willie, alcoholic addict, cocaine addict. Ken called me about a week ago and asked me if I wanted to speak, or if I would speak at this meeting, and I didn't really want to at first. And then I live in Santa Barbara, and I wasn't planning on attending this convention except for the banquet tomorrow night, but I was curious. He kind of talked me into it, and I was really excited afterwards. And then I also, I have to be very honest with you, it you know, memories started flooding back to me, and not a lot of good ones, and yet some really great stuff too. But at that time, it was just bad shit that was going through my head, and my sobriety date is. Well, backing up a little bit, I just wanted to correct Marshall here. When I got involved, it had nothing to do with my grandiosity, my ego, or you know. And I was the first person, the founder of CA. So there you have it.
Well, I make amends.
Now that I got that done with, my sobriety date is 2002, December 22nd. Now, I met Ken, and at that time I was like five or 6 years sober, and I was managing hospitals, recovery hospitals. And I'm going to make a few corrections up here that I've heard, and it's just my opinion, but basically but I know the truth, and can't hear me? Anyway, I'm going to make a few corrections today that most of you don't know about, and some of you might not like, but I'm going to just tell you the truth. I met Ken, And I had been going to AA meetings. I really was not very partial to NA meetings. It just wasn't me. Cocaine was a huge part of my life and my using. I was an alcoholic too, but in AA, it was like, sit down and shut up and listen, and they didn't want to hear about drugs. And it really turned a lot of young people away. And it was really disappointing. And so when these guys, I think the first meeting I went to was the whatever meeting with you, Ken, and the attractive thing about that meeting to me, to be honest with you, was the women. I mean, God, in 1980, it was like, whoa, and it was the rock and roll. It was hip. It was really hip, and it was much hipper than AA, that's for sure. And I was, sign me up, I'm ready to go. And I got involved. I met Johnny S. And Johnny and S and I became inseparable. We were, best friends. And I don't know much longer it was that one night Johnny asked me if I ran hospitals and I had all these offices and stuff like they're talked about before, but and Johnny had come over to visit and he goes, well, I want you to see our office, and he said, what? I said, well, where is it? He said, it's over at Beverly Glen Hospital. At that time, that was competition for me, and I was like, I don't want to go see that place, and he was proud of this office, and so one day he dragged me over there, I think to meet Ray or somebody, and it was a closet. And, about the size of two of these benches over here, and with a telephone. And they were proud as hell of that, and there was an enormous amount of excitement in CA that you didn't see in AA. I don't know why the big difference, maybe is the energy level that we have, but it was there and it was vivid. Everybody had energy. Everybody wanted to do something. They really did. And Johnny asked me to attend this meeting they were having, and it was all about, that was the general service office. I don't even know if that's what they really called it, but that was the first office that I knew about. And like I said, Ray handled the phones, and that was about it. We didn't have chips then. We didn't have literature, maybe a pieces of paper to telling you where to go to a meeting, but that was it. And Johnny invited me to go to this business meeting. I didn't really know exactly what it was, but when I got there, what they wanted to do was actually organize Cocaine Anonymous, and they wanted to start a World Service office. And kind of like Ken said, the guy that had the most sobriety got the job, and the real truth is Johnny wanted me to have that job. And there was another man there, Nolan Warner, who was around a lot in the early part of CA, and he had probably 10 years at that time, which was a big old-timer for us, and I had 5 or 6 years. I don't know what it was, but Nolan either didn't want the job or something happened. I ended up with the job. And at that time, Johnny appointed himself a trustee along with Ray and Reggie and somebody else. I don't know who else. And then we kind of scratched up some people, Richard, and just whoever wanted to be involved, and eventually a gentleman who's passed away now, Bob Minchin, who, Bob was one of those guys that had some money and nothing to do. So, he and Johnny were like a pair as far as that goes. Neither one of them had anything to do but Cocaine Anonymous. So, Bob did go get us an office someplace over off Washington, and we actually had a pretty nice office, and we filled it up, and we got busy. Johnny and I decided we wanted to have a convention. I like excitement, I always have, and I like fun, and going to AA conventions was fun. And so we decided to go up. I'm from Santa Barbara. We decided to go up there and check out an NA convention at the Miramar Hotel and see how they did it, and decide whether we want to have one. And so we went up there, and it was great, and so when we came back, we decided to go ahead and have our first convention up there. And at that time, there was a lot of noise coming from San Francisco that there was a lot of meetings starting up there. There was a lot of meetings here in the valley popping up. Everybody wanted to be secretary, so the meetings just started going like wildfire. And it's like, not that was an ego thing, but they started spreading. And actually, it was in demand. So we started the World Service Office, and then we decided to have this convention up in Santa Barbara, which, Happy has the shirt and all that. But one of the first things, downfalls we had, and it's nothing, it's minor now, but that time, I went up there and negotiated with them, and yes, I did put down my American Express card as a deposit for the convention. I wasn't worried about it, and nobody else. Well, we were worried about where we were going to get the money to pay for this thing, because we didn't have a lot of money coming in. We had, if you can imagine, the meetings weren't gigantic except for a few of them, and they needed their money for chips and literature of whatever kind they could get. And most of that time, we had AA literatures and big books. That's all we had. At any rate, we the setback was that our treasurer at the time, had borrowed a little money from us, and so when we needed the money, for part of the deposit and to pay for some of the stuff, it wasn't Ken. We would.
Well, we needed that 150 too.
We didn't trust Ken any farther than we could spit him. So it wasn't Ken. No, I called this guy one time because our phones were going to be shut off and we didn't know why, and he hadn't been paying the phone bills. And I asked him, we only had $800, or $1,800, and that was it. And this guy, he said, well, I kind of borrowed it, I'm like, yeah, well, I didn't really know what to say to him, so I called Johnny and I said, well, this guy kind of borrowed it and the money was in bad shape and he needed some money. And Johnny goes, is borrowing or embezzling? Which is the difference? And it's like, at any rate, we got over it. And I don't know if that guy ever paid the money back or not, but we did have we sent out literature to San Francisco, our flyers and stuff, and we got people from at that convention. We had, I think there was like 500 or 600 people. Is that close? Yeah. I know that at the banquet we actually had 280 people. That was it. And we had planned on 380, and just an enormous amount of people from San Francisco showed up. Somebody from Arizona. People from Texas. Yeah, all over the place. Our first speaker at a CA convention was John Bradshaw, and he was a friend of mine from Texas. And one of the conflicts that the World Service Office got into with, which started things off pretty poorly between the World Service Office and the trustees of Cocaine Anonymous, was there was a dilemma about, Johnny said that taping a speaker at a meeting was against the traditions, and I kind of argued that fact because I've been to AA and NA a lot and they taped all those meetings, but whatever, I taped it anyways. and got a lot of shit about it later, but at that time, we formed what was called the World Service Conference, and that in history was actually the first World Service Conference was held in a small room in a bungalow at the Miramar Hotel, and there was probably about 8 or 9 people. There were sort of delegates from San Francisco, a couple of people from other states, and then the trustees and a few other people. That meeting was actually taped, and I gave the tapes to somebody a couple of years ago. I just found out tonight that they just left that person's garage about a month ago, so maybe you'll find out what happened. But all we really did in that meeting was decide to have another meeting. Okay? That's really about what got accomplished. I have no idea. You might find out when you listen to the tapes. Probably a lot more than that. We were there for, an hour or so. There was a little ruckus going on from San Francisco that they thought, and this is only my opinion on that because I don't have any proof of it, but that the World Service Office should have been in San Francisco. And to neutralize things a little bit, we decided to have our next World Service convention in San Diego. In the meantime, I liked having conventions. That's all I like the organization, but the conventions were fun. And shortly after that, we formed the World Service Conference. and I was elected the chairman of the board of that also. And we had our very first World Service Conference, a real official one, in San Diego. I think it was about a year later or whatever. And let me tell you something. That was, you talk about the egos and the grandiosity, and talk about frickin' anger. I was the guy standing at the front of this room, and we had like 200 delegates come in from San Francisco, and they all had on these blue shirts, right? They had these blue. I'll never forget it, huh? Well, man, it's. I called them the blue meanies, man, because they were just like spitting fire, man, and I was like, whoa. There was, I don't know, Bob, do you know how many people were actually at that conference, delegates? It was a lot.
I think there was probably about 50.
Yeah, no, is that all?
Well, it wasn't a room much bigger than this, to be honest.
Yeah, okay. Well,
A little bigger than this,
yeah.
and maybe 50 or maybe 60 or not much.
There was a phone list of about 90.
Yeah, it seemed like 200 to me. And,
They were coming at you. Yeah, right.
and I was the bad guy. I was the bad guy at the front of the room, and I got accused of everything you could possibly think of, including stealing money from CA that weekend. They announced it in the conference that I had received a check for $2,500, and they had no account of what that money was for, and everybody knew what that was for. It was what they paid me back for the convention in Santa Barbara. But it was deliberately said in order to make somebody look bad, and I carry that resentment still today because it hurt me. It hurt me a lot. I'm almost over it, and. I'm working on it, okay? So, another thing that you should know is that Richard was incorrect about that hotline in Texas. I hired an attorney who was the one who incorporated as Ken, the World Service Office. Yeah, and at that point, we needed the name Cocaine Anonymous because we were around telling everybody we were Cocaine Anonymous, but we weren't. Now, I was in the hospital business, and believe me, I know what really happened. And what happened is there was a guy a doctor named Goldstein, who owned the name Cocaine Anonymous, and he was making a fortune off of it. And which is cool, that he came up with this idea, and 1 million people that were on cocaine started calling his hotline. And at that time, there wasn't any Cocaine Anonymous, so he had every right to do whatever he was doing, and he helped a lot of people, and he made a lot of money. But at that time, we wanted the name. And so my attorney said, well, this guy claims he's been having meetings for 4 or 5 years now, and, not meetings, but he's owned the name 4 or 5 years now, and you guys just started. When did you start? I said, about 5.5 years ago. And so I lied about it. And it was a battle. This guy was not going to surrender that name, and I don't blame him. He was making a lot of money off of it, and we put some pressure on him. And by that time, Cocaine Anonymous had really grown. There were meetings all over Texas then, and that's where his hospitals were. And it took another, I think, 2 years for him to actually officially surrender that name. I'm not sure how long it took, but we didn't pay him a nickel. We had to pay the attorney a lot of money. Nothing pissed off Johnny S. more than anything than dishing out money, and but that was money really well spent. There was a lot of crap going on. It was, he was actually absolutely correct. The egos. You talk about 90 wannabe lawyers, that were in those rooms for the conferences trying to figure out what we're going to do with our literature, what we're going to do with our chips, and they're all battling, they're frickin' lobbying outside, before they came in. It was ugly. That night it was fine, but boy, during the actual conference, it was really ugly. And I'm just telling you the stuff that I know, but we decided at that point to have one a year later, and I think we had it over here in the valley somewhere over there. Marriott Woodland Hills. But in the meantime, by that time, Cocaine Anonymous had grown. I mean, it was everywhere, and it's like this program was kind of built like our country was. I look at it as we're a bunch of pirates. We took what we learned from AA and we started our own thing because we wanted to do something different. And it was beautiful. AA didn't care; they were glad to get rid of us. Now they want us back. By the way, now they want us back. It's I don't go to many meetings these days where they don't talk about cocaine. So and I go to a lot of AA. So we're perfectly welcome there. I did want to mention the late Bob mentioned, but I also want to mention the late Johnny Siegel. Johnny didn't have a job and he had money. And so he had nothing but time. And if you knew Johnny really well, and you were lucky enough to be loved by him, things were really good. But if you didn't get along with Johnny, you got to see a real dark side of him also. And what happened to our friendship just melted away during some of the politics and some of the between the World Service Office and the trustees. And I got really tired of it. I like a good argument and I like to fight, but I don't like it continuously. And it turned out to be just the World Service Office against, or the trustees against the World Service Office. It was just a total egocentric egomaniacs going at each other. And I was the leader of the World Service Office, that's for sure. And my ego was really out of control. And it just it tended to get uglier and uglier. And in the middle of the next World Service Conference, I was the chairman of the World Conference and the chairman of the World Service Board. I won't call them, I don't know what else to call them, but just loyal soldiers that were the World Service Board, and they worked their asses off, and it's not like nobody else did either, but they really did. These people, just a handful of them, did everything they could to make your meetings better, and I felt like they got discredited really badly and shamed at the third conference, and in the middle of that conference I resigned, and let them have it back, it's like, let them fight with each other, but and that's what I saw. Johnny, we didn't speak for like 13 years. I called him once in a while and said Merry Christmas just to irritate him. And, I was very lucky. I relapsed, and when I relapsed, I needed, I was lonely and I was tired and beat, and Johnny Siegel was one man who could make me laugh more than anybody in the world, and I called him up and I asked him, could I see him again, and we were just like instantly best friends again. And, bless his heart that he's gone. He does deserve to be heard about in this meeting because he poured his life into it. And I don't agree with everything he did, but I do know that his heart was in the right place most of the time, and we benefited from that. And same with Bob Minchin. That guy died instantly from Enzerim, and his heart was in the right place. And I really believe deep down inside everybody's heart was in the right place. They just didn't know which direction to go. You talk about scattered. That's the way we were. But look what happened. Look what happened. Ken was just throwing some numbers at me earlier. They're just phenomenal about where these meetings are, and how much it's affected the world. I remember I started the first 2 CA meetings in Santa Barbara, and I used to drive up there every week. I used to have to pay my speakers gas money to get them up there. But I went to a picnic, a CA picnic there at Easter time, and there was 600 people there. And a lot of them weren't just CA; they were CA and AA. But it was just a beautiful sight, to see. And I'm sure you guys have been to bigger and better events, but there's little teeny meetings, all over the world too, that are keeping people alive and giving them the hope, And that's what it was all about, At first, it was entertain them. You know, keep them in their seats, entertain them, make it exciting, and it certainly was. You know, I'm trying to think. I mean, I wish I could remember everybody's name that was on that board at the time. You know, and I can't. But I do know that they worked really hard, and they deserve more than what they got. It's sad, but I'm mentioning it now because they did. And as for myself, you know, I have almost a year and a half right now. I went out there and you know, I had to do what I had to do. But I'm glad to be back. I was really happy to walk in here and see some really old faces. I mean, you know, it's just someplace I could go and know that I was going to be greeted with some smiles. And that's really important to me today. And I want to thank Ken again for asking me to speak.
Thanks, Willie. To end this, we're going to have some questions and answers if people care. And I've asked Jackie S. from London to just briefly share with us, as Willie said, you know, I was sharing with him earlier about what's happening with Cocaine Anonymous worldwide, where the old spectrum of where we came from, and I want Jackie to tell you about what's happening now, 10,000 miles away.
One more thing I wanted to mention. The World Service Office wasn't the only ones that worked their ass off. The trustees also did, even though we had conflicts going on. Those guys poured their hearts into it, too, and I wanted to make sure I mentioned that.
Yeah, thanks. My name's Jackie. My name's Jackie. I'm a cocaine addict. And thank you, Ken, for asking me to be here. And I didn't know till right now that I was going to talk about where we're at today. But just before I came down to this room this afternoon, I had a look in the latest Where to Find Our Meeting Guide for the UK to count the number of meetings. It was printed in April 2004, last month. There were 53 meetings. I know when I left London last week, 3 weeks later, there were 63 meetings. We are experiencing phenomenal growth. And it's thanks to a power greater than ourselves and to each and every person who's here today. We couldn't have done it without you. And, you know, as Ken was talking, and everybody here was talking about Johnny and the founding days of Cocaine Anonymous in this country, it just reminded me of how similar it was for us over there. You know, we still have stories of who brought the literature, who packed the literature, how we started, who was the first one, who wasn't. I mean, Steve is here today with me, and, you know, we've done service the last 10 years together. And I need to acknowledge that because, you know, the UK has experienced fantastic growth. And we've come over here and you've come over there. And as a consequence, you know, 2.5 years ago, Cocaine Anonymous started a meeting in Scotland, in Glasgow. And, you know, and it was fantastic. And Ken went to Glasgow, and your tapes, you know, so many people that have spoken and been to the meetings. Even if you have never been to Europe, people in Europe are listening to your tapes and getting inspired with the message, with the love, and with the passion of the message that is being carried. And, you know, there are now 8 meetings in Scotland, and they're hoping to come to the conference this year to be recognised as an area. You know, we have meetings today in Holland, in Belgium, in Spain. Last night was the first meeting in Johannesburg, South Africa. I went up to my room 2 days ago, and there's a message. Somebody's starting a new meeting in Paris, and they need me to call them. They're not big, the meetings in Europe, not like big like they are over here. But the seed is there. The spirit is there. The love is there. The message is there. You know, Ken was asking me to talk about what's happening today. You know, today we're experiencing tremendous growth and growing pains. You know, as we're getting organized, as our areas move from having 12 GSRs to having 64 GSRs, and we don't quite know what to do and how to do it, you know. We find that we're going through, wonderful, wonderful problems, really. We had a convention in the UK in March of this year, and I believe we attracted 700 recovering addicts. You know, I mean, for us, it's just, a gift. It's a gift that we're able to be there. It keeps me clean. I need to be there. I know that there's a number of members of next year's convention committee that are sitting in this room. And, we keep on planning to have fun, to have a party, to carry a really strong message. We invite you over to Europe. We love it when you come. Each and every person that comes, we just love it when you come and visit us. I guess that's where we are today. Thank you. I forgot. We have 2 CA meetings in Stockholm, Sweden, and I wouldn't like to forget it.
But before we open this up for question and answers for a few minutes, Willie talked about having fun, and I keep watching Bill wipe away tears. But Willie was talking about having fun. I had the opportunity to go to the UK to their convention a couple of years ago, and it was like being in Santa Barbara in 1985. The enthusiasm over there, I don't know how to describe it. It's just overwhelming, overwhelming. If you get an opportunity to do it, it's a fantastic trip. And anyway, the one thing I know is when I looked around the room, I saw more people than me and Bill wiping tears away from our eyes. So I'd like to give these guys a hand for coming out and sharing with us. So does anybody have any questions or comments or anything they'd like to say or add or at all? Yes, sir.
Kenny on that.
Hey, Kenny.
I'm just curious, from what I gathered, the first actual conference was about the San Diego convention. Is that right? I mean, when you really got together and
When we actually made official decisions,
right.
the San Diego.
And that was how long was that after it started?
86.
February 86. February 86. February. Thank you.
I'm Dave, I'm drunk and junkie.
Hey, Dave.
Hey, thank you.
Bob?
Hi, my name's Bob, and I'm a cocaine addict.
Bob?
Thank you, Willie. God bless you. And we had our differences, but that's okay. That's why we're standing here. And I don't think we were too mean, but we did have a blue shirt, and we did have a logo that was different than Los Angeles. And at that time, there was no official logo, so it didn't make much difference. And we had that on there, and I guess we were considered kind of the force from the north. Well, as we all know, there's differences between Northern California and Southern California, I do want to make a mention, too, it's been talked about by all of you good people up there about Tom Kenny, and he wasn't one of us, as I understand it, but he certainly did contribute to the founding of this fellowship. And he continued it to the founding of it in our area, because that's the way that I got the contact. I never knew anything about Cocaine Anonymous, I'd gotten sober in AA. I didn't have any meetings that I felt comfortable with talking about cocaine. There were a number of us that didn't, and we were looking around for some place to go. And I happened to be at a treatment program where a therapist told me, you know, there's this new program. I said, what is it? They said, Cocaine Anonymous. I said, I never heard of it. She said, well, what would you like to do about it? I said, well, how do I get information? And she gave me Tom's number. And I called Tom, and he said, well, I have a meeting format here. That's when you already had, this was in like June of 1983, and you guys had started in like November of 82, and by that time you'd written a format. He sent me up the format, and we went from there. We started the first meeting, I believe it was July 24th, 1983. I will say that I would like to take Northern California a little bit of credit. We did actually print the first metal chip. Which basically had...
Is that the one with the boxing gloves on it?
But it did have the logo, there was our logo at that time, in calligraphy on the chip. And in 1987, I believe, when it was either the second or the third conference, I believe, because we had them every 9 months after the first 2 or 3 years. Northern California, it was decided that the logo that you see now was voted on by the conference, and Northern California turned over that metal chip to the World Service Conference to be the official chip of the metal chip of Cocaine Anonymous. So we're kind of proud of that. And,
Should be.
We're just proud that we were able to be, proud of myself here, a part of the process of founding this great and wonderful fellowship that has saved people's lives all over the world. Thank you.
I'm happy Howard very good because I call it and I know all these people. Also, yeah, you know that's popular, right? My birthday is December 12th, 81, and you know, to hear the history of what we've gone through and to see the growth of it, you know, I came from South Central, the largest district in the world. There's been 84 meetings now, and we were a part of. And I went to the meeting over on Tom King's over there on Tuesday night, January of '83. I just celebrated a year, and it was a great meeting, you know. And I used to go there and bring the information back to South Central. You know, we had one meeting at the care unit, and I was in '85, and I got involved with World Service and Willie, Neil, Paya, Bob Mitchell, Michael, Richard. I mean, we just did the work. You know, we did a thing at, where was it, the Pepperdine, Malibu, to fund the 1986 San Diego conference. And we took up money, and everybody just had money. It was just people bringing us money, you know, and we just turned it in. It was, and we were growing, and Bob Campbell and Mort and Neil, I mean, and Jimmy, everybody, Misty, and South Central, we always showed up. I made them show up. See, when you said something, I told people in South Central, if you don't go, I'm going to vote for you. And so, I used to bribe them to come, you know, and I'm glad that, you know, we built Cocaine Anonymous. I love Alcoholics Anonymous, but this is our baby. You know, I don't take off my hat to anybody but Cocaine Anonymous. And if you don't stand up and be proud of something that you did, I mean, we represent this, you know, and I'm glad to see that Bob and I are good friends, and we fought like hell. We fought like hell at structured bylaws, but we the damn, we are friends. Neil Belinsky, he's a dear friend of mine, and there's so many people I haven't seen for years. Mike Pine, I went up there to San Jose years ago. I was at the first convention Shea in New York in '86. Bob Mixon and I went there representing the World Service Office. This is what we did, you know, and everyone in this room, I suggest to be part of that 1%. And anytime I get a chance to talk about Cocaine Anonymous, I'm proud to be one of those people who are in the trenches. See, because too many people from the West Side didn't come to South Central. But Ken Cross would come down, Bob Campbell would come down, Willie would come down, a few would come and share. But most of the people that stayed north of Wilshire, east of Los Angeles, and they left South Central State, you know. And I'm glad to be a part of it. And I'm going to be here the rest of my life, and I want to see all of you be a part of it. Yeah.
I only got 5 months sober.
What's your name? What's your name? What's your name?
The person that wrote, I'm a cocaine addict.
Is any?
Who's a cocaine
Who's a cocaine addict?
Greg out of Chicago.
Tony from Chicago.
Tony.
yes.
Tony S.
Yep.
No, I think it was
Chicago. Thank you.
Wayne, did you have your hand up?
My name's Wayne. I'm really grateful to be in this meeting. Really blessed to hear what I've heard. I was pretty overwhelmed too because I was one of the fortunate people who attended that meeting, World Convention in Santa Barbara. I had the privilege of going to John Siegel and Bob mentioned and some of the other people in Ken Fox. Bob Stevens become a legend. I think that sincerely, and I think happy for his modesty. The thing that I would like to just acknowledge is I'm grateful for the people that put this together, for people like me who got to talk to them and still do it. So